Welcome everyone. So this video is part of what's become my series on what does Google know about economics. So as you can see, I typed in elasticity, see what comes up. The first thing is not the economic definition. This is just like standard dictionary definition for the term elasticity. However, in this panel, they've got the economics interpretation of elasticity with actually some pretty good information. This definition from Wikipedia is pretty good. So in economics, elasticity measures the responsiveness of one economic variable to another. And that's exactly how we want to think about elasticity. So it's not necessarily locked into price elasticity of demand, though that's usually what comes to mind for students. There's also income elasticity, cross elasticity, and then price elasticity of supply. Now, before I go any further, I do have a video that's called All About Elasticity, where I go into great depth talking about the conceptual explanation for those four types of elasticities I just mentioned. So if you want to follow up with that, I'm sure you can find some value with that video. Here, I just wanted to comment, for my series, what it is that Google's going to help us with some economic terms, such as elasticity in this case. And so let's see. So what's a simple definition of elasticity? Yeah. So here again, this is one that didn't have anything to do with economics, although it does talk about something with this ability said to behave or respond elastically. I mean, we want to think about elasticity as responsiveness. So the formal definition of price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in price, right? And so maybe it'll say this here. What's elasticity in economics? Oh, again, so it's saying elasticity is an economic measure of how sensitive one economic factor is to changes in another. That's good. I mean, generally, that's what elasticity is. And then, for example, changes in supply or demand to the change in price, changes in demand to change in income. Yeah, that's not bad. So this is pretty good for Investopedia, actually. Oh, I should comment. So over here, this definition came from Wikipedia. And historically, Wikipedia had gotten a really bad reputation from like lots of other professors, like telling students not to look at Wikipedia or whatever. My view is actually Wikipedia is pretty good. In a lot of cases, the information is actually pretty solid. And sometimes you can find some good references for the citations that are linked up in Wikipedia. And so it's actually not a bad starting place. Sometimes, I should say more than sometimes, if you're researching a particular economic concept or maybe like a contribution in the literature or something like that, the Wikipedia editors or whatever will often cite maybe non-standard resources. So sometimes they're not like the first thing that would come to mind as something that should make the list of what you would cite. In those cases, what I'd say, if you're interested in doing like some type of research or whatever, the way better place to start would just be Google Scholar, right? So scholar.google.com would give you access to a lot of working paper version, and then the journal journal links for whatever paper it is that you might be interested in, and then you probably find access to it through your own school, through the school library or whatever. Anyway, so it's an easy example of elasticity. An example of products with elastic demand is consumer durables. So okay, so this is not an example like a numerical example, but it's basically like, give me an example of a good with pretty elastic demand. So for this, what you're thinking about is a good that's got a lot of substitutes. So the more substitutes, the more elastic is the demand, meaning the more responsive it is to changes in price. Also, if you have more time to be able to find alternatives, or if it occupies a larger part of your budget. Those are kind of the three quintessential determinants of elasticity. So the reverse would be, if there's not a lot of substitutes, your demand is probably pretty inelastic. If you don't have a lot of time to find alternatives, demand's probably pretty inelastic. And if it's a small portion of your budget, demand is probably pretty inelastic. And the idea is, if it's a small portion of your budget, you just don't care. And so like if the price is already pretty small and it rises maybe by even a large percentage, you might completely ignore that price increase because it's, if the price is like 10 cents or whatever and that doubles to 20 cents, it's not great, but if you're only buying one, it's not that big of a deal. Whereas if something is, $20,000 and it rises by 5%, that's a huge, in absolute terms, increase. Okay, so is elasticity a good thing in economics? I mean, it's a good concept for us to know. I have no idea what this is going to pull. Why is elasticity good or bad? I don't know. So this is bringing in some kind of I don't know, normative connotation or whatever. So we wouldn't necessarily think about elasticity being good or bad. It just kind of is. So it talks about, how responsive, how sensitive the good is going to be to price changes or income changes or the price of a related good in the case of cross elasticity. So it doesn't actually have any, it's not like a good or bad thing. What's this going to say here? So, oh, okay, because it's talking about like a good. So maybe that's what I imagine there's some type of AI or something, some type of web scraping or whatever that Google's pulling here. And they saw good. And so maybe they asked about good or bad. So this is leading us down a path that's not super productive, but is it better to be elastic or inelastic? Well, if you're interested in raising revenue, a price increase will raise revenue if demand is inelastic. A price decrease would raise revenue if it's elastic. Other things equal, we're interested in maximizing profits. Yeah, you'd rather be selling a good for which demand is inelastic. Other things equal. Although, let's see what it says here. So inelastic goods are likely to continue producing revenue during down market. Yeah, look at that. So here I was guessing that this might say something about revenue, the link between revenue. And I do have a video linking up elasticity, the link between elasticity and revenue, with the revenue maximizing point corresponding to the midpoint of the demand curve. Okay, so is a car elastic or inelastic? I would imagine. So automobile transportation demand is probably pretty inelastic. Definitely for gasoline, demand is pretty inelastic, or electricity if you have an EV or something like that, because there's few substitutes. And so that's what it'll say here. Oh, it's going to say highly elastic. So is a car elastic or inelastic? And what's it pulling on here? It's saying demand for a specific model of automobile is highly elastic because there's so many substitutes. That's different, right? So I was answering a different question. So one of our other determinants of elasticity is the more narrow that you're thinking, the more narrow that you're specifying the particular product category, the more elastic, because the more substitutes there will be. So this is talking about cars, like a particular version of the car, right? Versus cars more generally. I was answering for like cars more generally. So if you're thinking about Coca-Cola, like regular Coca-Cola, demand for regular Coca-Cola is going to be pretty elastic because there's a lot of substitutes. There's Pepsi, there's Royal Crown, RC Cola, right? Whole variety. And then there's all the other flavors. So there's Mountain Dew and then Sprite or whatever. So there's lots of different soda flavors. And then other things that are not soda. Demand for soda overall would be more inelastic because it would, the way that you'd say it, soda overall would encompass the entire category of soda. And so we wouldn't be, so in the category, our substitutes would have to be everything that's not soda. So juice, water, milk, whatever. So that's what this is saying here. Is it's saying the car is elastic. It should say specifically, it's not just a car or automobile transportation as I was answering. It should say, is demand for a specific, like a Toyota Corolla. Demand for the Toyota Corolla is going to be pretty elastic because there's lots of substitutes in that kind of small car, four-door car class. Is bottled water elastic or inelastic? Well, so here again, I'm not quite sure what it's going to say. So if we mean like one particular brand of bottled water, like Dasani or Aquafina or something like that, elastic, because then you'd have at least those and then several others as substitutes. If you're thinking about bottled water as the category, now the alternatives have to be things that are not bottled water. So tap water and then other beverages. And so because there is tap water, demand is going to be a little bit more elastic for bottled water than it would be probably for soda, because soda doesn't, you wouldn't have like soda from the tap. That would count as a reasonable substitute. Anyway, let's see what it says here though. Perfectly inelastic demand. Most people would pay any price for water, however, bottled water is relatively price elastic. This is horrible. Look at this. So is bottled water elastic or inelastic? It's going to say perfectly inelastic, and then that's specific. That's for water generally, and then it's saying bottled water is relatively price elastic because tap water is plentiful and practically free. Yeah, that's right. So, all right. So your demand for water, I agree, is perfectly inelastic. You need it to survive, right? So demand for water is going to be perfectly inelastic. Demand for bottled water, which is what it says here in the question, is going to be much more elastic. And so I would say bottled water is relatively price elastic because tap water is plentiful and practically free. And then I'd say your demand for tap water is probably even more elastic than than the demand for bottled water, because you'd have, well, at your house maybe or something like that, but I guess the substitute then would be like well water or something. I don't know. So we're kind of splitting hairs at a certain point, I guess. Whatever. So I don't know. So there's some other things, milk or whatever. I want to see what this is talking about. Examples of elasticity. So I wonder if this is going to give me price elasticity, cross elasticity, income elasticity. Nope, it's gonna talk about this is the consumer durables example. So it's gonna say a good that's elastic versus a good that's inelastic. So we said gasoline's a good example of demand that's going to be pretty inelastic. And then you probably say like shampoo is a good with pretty elastic demand. What are the determinants? So we said number of substitutes, the time to make a decision, the proportion of your budget. Let's see what else it's going to say. Price levels, that's kind of like proportion of your budget, income levels, availability, potential substitutes. Yeah, this isn't bad. They should say something about the time to find a substitute, but this is, I mean, Investopedia. So between Wikipedia and Investopedia, you're way better served by looking at Wikipedia, no question. Okay, so 4 factors that affect elasticity. This should probably be those things. Yeah, availability of substitute, if the good is a luxury or necessity, proportion of time, how much time has elapsed since the time the price has changed. Oh, okay. So this is like how much time you have to be able to become aware of the change in price and then find an alternative, I guess is how they're framing that one. What was the one that I didn't say previously? If the good is a luxury or necessity. The idea there is like if the good is a luxury, you're going to have much more elastic demand, be much more price sensitive than if it's a necessity. And then you definitely have to buy the good regardless of how price might rise or whatever. So, okay, I've had about all that I can handle with this one here. I'll go ahead and conclude. Like I mentioned, I got a video on all about elasticity might be useful and the link between elasticity and revenue. But I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you next time.